America played one of the key roles in the Allied victory in World War II. Let's find out what famous American generals thought of their allies and enemies. Write in the comments whose opinion you agree with. Dwight D. Eisenhower about Douglas MacArthur.
He was a forceful, some thought an overpowering individual, blessed with a fast and facile mind, interested in both the military and political side of our government. 52 years old, essentially a romantic figure, very appreciative of good work, positive in his convictions, a genius at giving concise and clear instructions, placed a letter of commendation on my record, and has assured me that as long as he stays in the Army, I am one of the people earmarked for his gang. Probably no one has had tougher fights with a senior than I had with MacArthur. I just can't understand how such a damn fool could have gotten to be a general. MacArthur could never see another sun, or even a moon for that matter, in the heavens, as long as he was the sun. I studied dramatics under him for 5 years in Washington and 4 years in the Philippines. Spent the entire day preparing drafts of President's messages to MacArthur and Quezon. Long, difficult, and irritating. Both are babies.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about George C. Marshall.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are some things that cause me to be almost emotional. Now, I believe that there are many of you here who knew General Marshall well, yourself, all during his war years. The work he did and the way he did it. From World War I onward, I had often heard of George Marshall. By older officers, he was always described as a brilliant soldier. By many, as a genius. But until World War II was a week old, I had met him only twice. And then, but momentarily, my direct association with him began December 14th, 1941. On that Sunday morning, a great deal of our conversation dealt with the situation in the Pacific. General Marshall brought me up to date with events, and then said that he would look to me for assistance in planning help for that beleaguered area. I was brought in, and my relationships with him have been largely, almost exclusively, official. But I would like to say, and I have been saying this ever since I first knew him well, that he to me has typified all that we look for in what we call an American patriot. I saw many things he did that were proof to me, at least of his selflessness. I am quite certain that he did not want to sit in Washington and be a chief of staff. I am sure he wanted a field command, but he wouldn't even allow his chief to know what he wanted, because he said, "I am here to serve and not to satisfy personal ambition." I thought of his moral courage, calmness, and wisdom after the war began in directing the mobilization and worldwide deployment of great armies and air forces, of the readiness and selflessness he displayed in forsaking all his own cherished plans as he undertook new and onerous duties in the afternoon of his life. These, and a myriad of other things, I prayed that he might fully understand, but his modesty would have rejected any effort of others to tell him.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Omar Bradley.
Bradley's most promising characteristic is getting there, and if he keeps up the clip he started, some of us will someday be bragging to our grandchildren that, sure, General Bradley was a classmate of mine.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about George S. Patton.
I clearly understand that firm and drastic measures are at times necessary in order to secure the desired objectives. But this does not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates. I feel that the personal services you have rendered the United States and the Allied cause during the past weeks are of incalculable value. But nevertheless, if there is a very considerable element of truth in the allegations accompanying this letter, I must so seriously question your good judgment and your self-discipline as to raise serious doubts in my mind as to your future usefulness. Patton is indispensable to the war effort, one of the guarantors of our victory. Fundamentally, he is so avid for recognition as a great military commander that he will ruthlessly suppress any habit of his that will tend to jeopardize it.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Bernard Montgomery.
There wasn't anyone else who could have got us across the Channel and ashore in Normandy. It was his sort of battle. Monty could be difficult. However, no one else could have got us across the Channel and kept us there.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Georgy Zhukov.
Georgy is a very decent fellow. If he were left on his own, I believe I could do business with him. Now, when I knew Marshal Zhukov, I will say this. He was a competent soldier. A man could not have conducted the campaigns he did, could not have explained them so lucidly and in terms of his own strength and his own weaknesses and so on, except that he was a well-trained, splendid military leader. He and I developed personally a practice of getting along and seeing eye to eye on a number of our local problems in Berlin. And so far as I was concerned, and I believe he was honest about it, we were trying to set up a pattern, if we could, in Berlin, in our little local place there, to show that even two nations could get along if they would both recognize the folly of not getting along. Now, what this means today, I don't know. The last time I had a direct letter from him was April 1946, and that was a long time ago. Now, I explained to him how absolutely impossible it was for a democracy to organize a surprise aggression against anybody. Our processes are open. Every time you get money or you change anything in your military affairs, you go to Congress. It is debated. There is no possibility of a country such as ours producing a completely surprise attack on the other. And that is what I was emphasizing to him. He felt that Russia was a very peace-loving nation.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Chester W. Nimitz.
To an old comrade in arms, of wars in the field and wars in Washington, from his devoted friend, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dear Chester, I was delighted to see again that picture of the two of us taken in Richmond some too many years ago, and grateful to you for inscribing one copy for me. The other is being returned to you with this note. It brings to you my best wishes for your health and happiness, and, as always, my warm regards.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Erwin Rommel.
He is a great general, but not a superman. I am sure that Germans would be thrown out of Africa, despite them being under Rommel's generalship.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Adolf Hitler.
Hitler is a power-drunk egocentric. His personal magnetism had converted large populations in Germany to his insane schemes and blindly accept his leadership. Unless he is successful in overpowering the whole world by brute force, the final result will be that Germany will have to be dismembered and destroyed. Hitler's record with the Jews, his rape of Austria, of the Czechs, the Slovaks, and now the Poles, is as black as that of any barbarian of the Dark Ages.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Pietro Badoglio.
Everything Marshal Badoglio does to wage war actively against Germany will raise his government by that much in the esteem of the United Nations. For 3 long years, Italy has been an enemy of the United Nations, and there has been built up a mass psychology which is not as willing to accept the Italians as soldiers on the field. It is Marshal Badoglio's duty today to do so just as quickly as possible. I hope Marshal would so advise the King.
Dwight D. Eisenhower about Charles de Gaulle and Henri Giraud.
I believe that, so far as my relations with Charles de Gaulle are concerned, not only during the war, but in shape days and then as president, they were not ever rough or unpleasant in a personal way. This man and I have always been very good friends, although the start of our relations was not a really very promising start, because in London, in 1942, they were more or less of a formal thing. It wasn't until he came into Africa, and I have forgotten the exact time, but let's say in about June, maybe a little earlier in 1943, that we really got to know one another personally. Now, the difficulty with our relations then were his troubles with Giraud. General Giraud came as a rival for leadership with the blessing of the Allies, and, of course, this was an anathema to General de Gaulle. Here and there were some little unpleasant scenes, but the fact is it was only before Giraud made clear his distaste for politics, and then accepted without question de Gaulle's preeminence in the political field. Giraud wanted to command the French troops in the field. That's what he really wanted to do. Well, of course, it didn't really work out in the long run, and finally Giraud disappeared from the scene. He was a gallant man, but he had no interest in politics whatsoever. So, from there on, General de Gaulle and I got to know each other well.
Douglas MacArthur about Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The best clerk I've ever had.
Douglas MacArthur about Hirohito.
Destroy him and the nation will disintegrate. His connection with affairs of state up to the time of the end of the war was largely ministerial and automatically responsible to the advice of his counselors. I believe all hope of introducing modern democratic methods would disappear, and that when military control finally ceased, some form of intense regimentation, probably along communistic lines, would arise from the mutilated masses.
Omar Bradley about Bernard Montgomery and George S. Patton.
We had done our part, set the lower jaw at Argentan, and restrained Patton from a brash and foolish overextension. Monty, perhaps too busy with his own strategic plans, had turned his part over to the Canadians, an unproven army depending to a great extent on 2 armored divisions, one Canadian, one Polish, both new to combat. I could not understand why at such a critical moment Monty had not reinforced the Canadians with some of his battle-hardened British troops, especially the armor. Although Patton might have spun a line across the narrow neck, I doubted his ability to hold it. 19 German divisions were now stampeding to escape the trap. Meanwhile, with 4 divisions, George was already blocking 3 principal escape routes through Alençon, Cise, and Argentan. Had he stretched that line to include Falaise, he would have extended his roadblock a distance of 40 miles. The enemy could not only have broken through, but he might have trampled Patton's position in the onrush. I much preferred a solid shoulder at Argentan to the possibility of a broken neck at Falaise. If Monty's tactics mystified me, they dismayed Eisenhower even more, and a shocked Third Army looked on helplessly as its quarry fled. Patton raged at Montgomery's blunder.
George C. Marshall about Dwight D. Eisenhower.
While I have no indication from the President as to the date he will accept my release as Chief of Staff, I do not think there is a shadow of a doubt regarding your appointment to succeed me. The strongest weapon that I have always had in my hand was a confident feeling that you trusted my judgment.
George C. Marshall about Omar Bradley.
Quiet, unassuming, capable, with sound, common sense, absolute dependability. Give him a job and forget it.
George C. Marshall about George S. Patton.
Patton is unable to use reasonably good sense in all those matters where senior commanders must appreciate the effect of their own actions upon public opinion, and this arises doubts as to the wisdom of retaining him in high command. Its effect on you and the troops, and on the confidence of the public in the War Department, and in you is opposed to the unmistakable fact that Patton is the only available Army commander for his present assignment who has had actual experience in fighting Rommel and in extensive landing operations, followed by a rapid campaign of exploitation. Whether or not we can forego the latter advantage because of the unfavorable effects referred to, I leave entirely to your Eisenhower's decision.
George S. Patton about Douglas MacArthur.
I met General MacArthur commanding a brigade. He was walking about too. I joined him, and the creeping barrage came along towards us, but it was very thin and not dangerous. I think each one wanted to leave, but each hated to say so we let it come over us. We stood and talked, but neither was much interested in what the other said, as we could not get our minds off the shells. I was the only man on the front line except for General MacArthur, who never ducked a shell.
George S. Patton about Bernard Montgomery.
Little limey prick.
George S. Patton about Georgy Zhukov.
My dear General, my colleagues in the Red Army hold your accomplishments during your drive across France and the Low Countries in extremely high regard. Therefore, it's my honour to present before you our new cannon, named after our Premier Joseph Stalin. Its estimated firing range is approximately 20 miles.
Is it so, dear Marshal, sir? I might need to tell you something. If any of my troops manning the posts in Bavaria fire at your men before they've marched to within 20 yards of their sight, I'd shoot my men for cowardice. Russians are nothing more than a filthy bunch of drunk Mongoloid bandits.